The young and the restless spoilers in the polished conference rooms of Abbott Tower, where the walls had witnessed decades of victories, betrayals, and fragile truces, the latest battle between brothers erupted not with a whisper, but with the force of nuclear detonation. Jack Abbott, the patriarch not just of a family but of a corporate dynasty, had always carried the weight of his bloodline like a crown laced with thorns. He believed in stewardship, in legacy, in the hard-won values their father instilled in them. And for years, Jack had tried, sometimes through clenched teeth and sleepless nights, to see Billy Abbott not just as the reckless younger sibling he so often proved to be, but as a man capable of growth, of vision, of responsibility. That belief, fragile and worn thin over the years, had recently been put to the ultimate test when Jack handed Billy control of Abbott Communications. Not as a favor, but as a declaration of trust. He had believed that Billy was finally ready. He was wrong. The news hit Jack like a thunderclap through glass. Billy, in a move that felt both petty and catastrophic, had revealed plans to not only aid Kane Ashby in reclaiming Chancellor Industries, a company that Jill had sold off after years of bitter negotiations, but also to hand Abbott Communications over to Sally Spectra. That name alone was enough to make Jack's pulse spike. Sally, with her flair for chaos and history of manipulation, had wormed her way through Newman and Forrester circles alike. And now, through Billy's sheer disregard for the gravity of legacy, she was being offered the keys to the Abbott media empire like it was a game of Monopoly. Jack didn't shout at first. He didn't throw things or storm out. Instead, he stood there in a stunned, stony silence as the weight of Billy's betrayal took form, tightening around his chest like a vice. For a moment, it wasn't even about business. It was about the brother he had loved, protected, forgiven, again and again. The brother who, despite every opportunity, every second chance, always found a way to destroy what had been given. And then, like a dam breaking, the fury came. Jack's voice didn't rise so much as it thundered, accusations slicing through the boardroom like scalpels. He told Billy, with a trembling calm that only made it more terrifying, that this wasn't just a lapse in judgment. This was sabotage. That Billy was so consumed with petty vendettas and his empty obsession with defeating Victor Newman that he was willing to throw two entire corporations into a bonfire just to feed his ego. Jack wasn't wrong. Billy, in recent months, had allowed his contempt for Victor to metastasize into something dangerous. What had begun as spirited rivalry had warped into fixation. Victor, in his usual cold-blooded style, had dismissed Billy time and again as a joke, as Jill's impulsive mistake. And rather than let the past rot where it belonged, Billy had begun devising a warped form of redemption. In his mind, helping Kane reclaim Chancellor wasn't betrayal, it was poetic justice. And placing Sally at the helm of Abbott Communications wasn't negligence, it was strategy. Sally, he believed, had the fire to make the company something Jack never could, unpredictable, untamed, impossible to ignore. But Billy never saw what Jack saw. He never saw the cracks he was carving into the foundation of their family. He didn't see that Chancellor was gone for a reason, that Jill had made peace with her decision. And he didn't understand that giving Sally power wasn't innovation, it was surrender. Jack saw the moves for what they were, not bold, but blind. Not visionary, but volatile. And so, Jack gave the warning he never thought he'd have to say out loud. You're going to ruin both companies. It wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. Abbott Communications would crumble under Billy's neglect, especially if Sally's chaotic vision turned the company into a circus. Chancellor would never be recovered, not if Kane was propped up by delusions of legacy and revenge. And when the dust settled, Billy would be standing alone. Without a company, without respect, and worst of all, without the trust of the one man who had fought to keep him relevant in a town that saw him as nothing more than a cautionary tale. The tragedy wasn't that Billy had made a mistake. It was that he had made it knowingly. He knew what Jack would feel. He knew how fragile the peace was between them. And yet, he made the call. He shook hands behind backs. He treated the family name like a bargaining chip. And for what? To get back at Victor? To prove something to Jill? To chase a version of himself that never truly existed? The fallout was immediate. Jack began pulling financial oversight. He froze the discretionary budget. He called in board members for emergency review. Word spread through Genoa City like fire in dry grass. Jack Abbott was cutting Billy loose. Not in anger, but in preservation. He would not allow his father's legacy, or the company he bled for, to be turned into collateral damage in Billy's psychodrama. Abbott Communications employees felt the shift overnight. Strategic plans were paused. Marketing campaigns were re-evaluated. And Sally, once riding high on the idea of inheriting an empire, suddenly found her emails going unanswered and her proposals marked pending review. Jack wasn't just pulling funding. He was exorcising Billy from the business like a surgeon removing a tumor. Billy, of course, fought back. He accused Jack of being afraid of change, of being threatened by new voices and new ideas. He said that Jack had always wanted control, not partnership. That his generosity was a leash, not a lifeline. But his words lacked power, because deep down, past the anger and wounded pride, Billy knew Jack was right. He had gone too far. And unlike before, this time there would be no forgiveness waiting at the end of the hallway. Because this wasn't just a fight between brothers. It was the collapse of a dynasty from within. And when families fall in Genoa City, they don't just crack. They detonate. Billy might still believe he's playing a long game. That somehow, this betrayal is a step toward a greater victory. But what he doesn't see, what he refuses to see, is that the moment he handed over the reins to Sally and embraced Kane's vendetta, he stopped being a visionary. He became a liability. And Jack Abbott, weary and worn but never weak, did what he had to do. He cut the cord. For love. For legacy. And maybe, just maybe, for the faint hope that one day, Billy might realize that family isn't about revenge or power, it's about trust. And once that's broken, no empire, no matter how powerful, can survive. Long before the confrontation in the Abbott boardroom, long before the first bottle of Chardonnay was uncorked to celebrate Billy's new leadership role at Abbott Communications, there was a seed, small, bitter, and growing, buried deep in Billy's chest. It had been planted the day Jill Abbott, in a move he still considered a betrayal of maternal instinct, sold Chancellor Industries to Victor Newman. That was supposed to be his legacy. Not a gift, but a birthright. A piece of his father's memory, his identity, the last symbol of stability in a life perpetually defined by chaos. And she handed it to Victor, of all people. Not just a rival, but the man Billy saw as a puppeteer of Genoa City's suffering. That decision shattered something in him. And no matter how many years passed or how many opportunities were placed in his hands, Billy never stopped looking over his shoulder at what he believed had been stolen. That obsession festered. It colored every decision. It consumed him. So when Kane Ashby re-emerged, wounded, but resourceful, Billy saw a door swing open. A chance. A way back to Chancellor. A second chance at a destiny he believed had been hijacked. Never mind the history between them. Never mind the fact that trust between Billy and Kane was thinner than tissue paper. In Billy's mind, the ends justified the means. If teaming up with Kane, if revisiting that false alliance scene between Nick Newman and Kane, meant getting Chancellor back, then that was a compromise Billy was more than willing to make. Not because he trusted Kane. Not even because he believed Kane could win. But because Billy couldn't bear to watch someone else wear the crown that should have been his. The irony, of course, was staggering. Jack had just given Billy control of Abbott Communications. Not out of obligation, but out of belief, an honest, heartfelt belief that his brother was ready. That the wounds had healed. That the restless boy had become a man. Jack saw the future in Billy. And Billy, in return, saw nothing but the past. That's the tragedy of Billy Abbott. He doesn't know how to stand still. He doesn't know how to protect what he has, only how to mourn what he lost. So instead of building Abbott Communications into a media empire that could rival Newman Media or Jabot, he plotted its quiet handoff to Sally Spectra, a woman who, while ambitious and undeniably capable, was a wild card. A risk Jack would never take with the family name. Jack wasn't angry because Billy had plans. He was angry because Billy had no strategy. Emotion led every move, and in Genoa City, that was a death sentence. Jack had seen this pattern play out before. Chance come. Burned to the ground before it could solidify its foundation. The Chancellor Winter's fallout, another crater in Billy's legacy. And now, another impulsive decision, another shortcut toward redemption, another gamble disguised as innovation. But Jack, ever the guardian, knew better. He didn't see vision in Billy's actions. He saw sabotage. When he accused Billy of being obsessed with defeating Victor, it wasn't an insult, it was a lifeline. A last-ditch attempt to drag his brother out of the fire before he turned to ash. Because Jack understood something Billy never admitted, even to himself, this wasn't about Chancellor. It wasn't even about Victor. It was about self-worth. About trying, over and over again, to prove to a city that never truly respected him that he could be more than the Abbott screw-up. That he could be feared, respected, remembered. But legacy isn't earned through vendetta. And no one knew that better than Jack. That's why his words cut so deeply. You're evaluating your life by whether or not you can beat Victor, he said, but he meant something deeper. He meant that Billy's compass was broken. That every decision he made was a reaction, not a plan. A chase for validation. A chase for applause. And it was never enough. Never complete. Never rooted in truth. Billy had been given so much. A family name. A seat at the table. A new start. But every time he got close to building something lasting, he walked away. Not because he failed. But because he was addicted to the climb, to the friction, to the adrenaline of starting over. And that addiction had consequences. Jack had reached the end of his patience. Not because he didn't love Billy. But because love wasn't enough anymore. Not when businesses, livelihoods, and legacies were on the line. Not when Sally Spectra, capable but untested, was being handed the reins in the middle of a personal crisis. And not when Billy's fixation with Kane and Chancellor risked dragging the entire Abbott empire into the mud. Sally, for her part, remained confident. She always did. She believed she could handle Abbott Communications. That she could bring a fresh voice, a modern vision. And perhaps she could. But the timing, the method, the complete disregard for family consultation, it painted the move not as bold, but reckless. Diane saw it. So did Ashley. And Jack? Jack saw it most of all. It was Billy, all over again, burning down the room just to prove he could rise from the ashes. But the city was watching. And Genoa City has long memories. It remembers the chaos. The crashes. The times Billy walked away. And it remembers the cost. In the end, it wasn't about Chancellor. Or Sally. Or even Victor. It was about the void Billy couldn't fill. The ghost he couldn't outrun. The echo of a legacy he believed belonged to him but was always just out of reach. Jack's final words weren't just a warning. They were a requiem. A reminder that if Billy couldn't hold on to what he had, he'd never build anything that lasted. And so, once again, the Abbott family stood at a crossroads. Jack, weary but resolute, prepared to clean up the fallout. Sally, still standing, tried to prove she could steer the ship. And Billy, torn between vengeance and vision, faced the quiet realization that he might never escape the loop he built for himself. In Genoa City, ambition is never enough. And obsession always comes with a price. The storm that had been gathering in whispers and sidelong glances finally broke with the weight of an ultimatum, simple in its delivery but seismic in its consequences. Jack had reached the end. No more benefit of the doubt. No more softly spoken reminders of legacy or second chances. This time, it was final. Choose Abbott Communications, or lose everything. There would be no luo in tone, no protective arm around his shoulder, no elder brother swooping in to fix the damage after another one of Billy's reckless, emotionally driven implosions. The confrontation, though private, radiated fury like a nuclear core about to breach containment. And it wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about betrayal. About love given without condition, and the cruelty of watching that gift be tossed aside like a paper crown in a child's tantrum. Billy stood his ground, still clinging to the same defense he always returned to, that this was his best shot at finally taking down Victor Newman. That by backing Kane, reclaiming Chancellor, and installing Sally as a disruptive force at the head of Abbott Communications, he was not undermining Jack, he was fighting fire with fire. But Jack didn't see strategy in those words. He saw deflection. He saw a man so desperate to conquer his demons that he couldn't see the battlefield he was standing on was actually a family home, and he was burning it to the ground from within. The betrayal wasn't just in the plan, it was in the silence. Billy had made these moves without consulting Jack. No conversation. No forewarning. Not even a polite heads-up. That silence, that omission, that deliberate choice to act as if his brother's opinion no longer mattered, that was what truly cracked Jack open. In his voice, as he confronted Billy, there was no rage. No dramatics. Just heartbreak. "I gave you a gift of love and trust," he said, and the pain in those words was not theatrical, it was raw. This wasn't a CEO speaking to a subordinate. This was a brother speaking to the boy he helped raise. The boy who once cried when their father died. The man who had needed help standing so many times that Jack had lost count. Billy, for all his defiance, knew Jack was right. That he hadn't just gone rogue, he had gone dark. He had traded honesty for tactics. Family for ego. And still, he couldn't stop. The obsession ran too deep. The belief that defeating Victor would somehow validate his existence, would finally prove he wasn't just the mistake of the Abbott family, that haunted him. He believed he could fix the shame of past failures by rewriting the narrative through revenge. That if he could just win, it would all make sense. But Jack saw the same pattern repeating. The way Billy couldn't stay committed to anything long enough to nurture it. The way he abandoned progress the moment it stopped feeding his validation. First Chancecom, then Chancellor Winters, and now Abbott Communications. All of them chapters in a book Billy never finished. Jack had tried to be patient. He had tried to be kind. But the reality was clearer now than it had ever been. If he didn't act, Billy would destroy everything. And so, the ultimatum came down, not from a place of cruelty, but from clarity. Billy had a choice to make: stay with Abbott Communications, commit to the vision, build something real, or walk away and lose not just the company, but every remaining thread of goodwill Jack had left to offer. This time, there would be no rescue. No pivot. No renegotiation. If Billy crossed this line, it would be on his own. He would own the consequences. The question, of course, hung heavy: would Jack actually pull the funding? He had made threats before. Warnings meant to shock Billy back to sanity. But this felt different. There was steel in Jack's voice, a finality that hadn't been there in previous arguments. This wasn't about money. This was about protecting what remained of their father's legacy. About stopping Billy from going so far into the dark that there would be no way back. Jack wasn't just trying to save Abbott Communications. He was trying to save his brother from himself. And what no one else saw, what Billy refused to confront, was that Jack's threat wasn't about power or control. It was about pain. Jack had loved Billy not just as a sibling, but as a surrogate father. After John died, it was Jack who carried Billy through his worst spirals. Jack who wrote the checks. Jack who defended him at board meetings. Jack who forgave the gambling, the affairs, the scandals. Not because Billy deserved it, but because Jack hoped he could grow. Because every time he gave Billy something to hold, he prayed that this time, Billy would finally recognize its worth. But the signs were always the same. Billy would get bored. He would get distracted. And he would find some new dragon to slay, usually in the form of Victor. And then, in the wake of his own chaos, he would ask why no one trusted him. Why everyone treated him like a risk. And Jack, exhausted, would pick up the pieces. Again. But now, there would be no pieces to pick up. If Billy chose Chancellor, if he handed Abbott communications to Sally without Jack's consent, if he let personal vendettas dictate the company's future, he would be out. Jack made that clear. Not just removed from his position. Cut off. The funding would vanish. The support, the structure, the name, all of it. Jack would strip it bare and start again without him. It wasn't revenge. It was preservation. The weight of that choice settled on Billy's shoulders like a mountain. On one side, the satisfaction of his crusade against Victor, the illusion of redemption. On the other, the quiet stability of something real, something he had never held on to before. And for the first time in years, Billy realized that no matter which choice he made, he had already lost something. Jack's faith. That was the true casualty of this war. And faith, once broken, doesn't regenerate easily. In Genoa City, legacies are not only inherited. They are built. Earned. And in moments like this, they are tested. Billy Abbott stood at the edge of a decision that would define the rest of his life. And for once, not even Jack could save him.